interdisciplinary dialogue on virtue ethics and moral psychology. And Nancy, I often cringe. I still think back that as a first or second year graduate student, you somehow talked me into writing a paper on Piaget, Kohlberg, and Rawls, which I had no business doing. But I think also you were working on your project on compassion, so I think I benefited from that work as well. But what she taught me and others that I think is really important with that is that philosophy should not be siloed, and that it has much to say and contribute to public life and in conversation with other disciplines, all of which are commitments that I think animate the work here at NAEP. So it's really fitting that we have Nancy here as the committee for today. But I'm also reminded of the most important lesson she taught me whenever somebody asks me, what was it like being her student? And my answer always is, it was great fun. Always great fun. Because through her work, through her teaching, through her mentorship, she exemplifies that philosophy can be intellectually rigorous while also a joyful enterprise. Sometimes I think we forget that, but it can always be a joyful enterprise. So her keynote address is entitled Promoting Civility and Respect in Higher Education and Beyond. I think at a time when polarization and incivility seem to dominate so much of our public life, her insights are more necessary than ever. The dearth of models for civic discourse and civil discourse and engagement, I think, present a really important opportunity for institutions of higher education, but they're not without risk. I have no doubt that her talk will be as thought-provoking and inspiring as the work she's devoted her life to. So please join me in welcoming Nancy Stein.
Thank you for that. Hang on, don't go. Thank you for that excessively generous introduction. Did anybody record that by any chance? That's really, really way over the top, Warren. Thank you so much. And I'm so proud of Warren. You know, I remain a philosophy professor, and Warren is now the president of a university. So there you go. Now, I'm going to be very mindful of the time because I am aware that Tony and I are all that is standing between you and dinner. So, okay. Let me start with a brief word or two about the timeliness of the topic. So, a few months ago, 4 deans, I think 3 deans at Columbia University were dismissed from their positions, and a 4th one was put on administrative leave. And this was because they were caught exchanging very disrespectful texts during a meeting of the Columbia College Alumni Association, and this was in connection with some anti-Semitism that apparently they endorsed in light of the Gaza protests, or Palestinian and Israeli conflict in Gaza, and that there were some protests on campus. So more recently, you might know that the president of Columbia was forced to resign. And so this is really an incident that brings home to us the fact that we're in a culture today that is not really as civil as it could be, either publicly or privately. And I'm going to give you a brief outline here of how I plan to proceed. I'm going to talk about key concepts, then about the conceptual and the practical, which I think are very heavily interwoven on this issue, and then make some remarks about implementing change, and take us through some lessons in social science. So the key concepts, and by the way, I love doing this stuff. You know, I just love this. It's my creative outlet. So here's the linkage of incivility and disrespect. And this is from some work that I encountered when I was doing research. And I'm giving you three snippets here that show that incivility is thought to be, at any rate, linked with respect. So Berger, 2000, incivility is any speech or action that is disrespectful or rude. Clark, incivility indicates disregard and insolence for others, causing an atmosphere of disrespect, conflict, and stress. Clark goes on to note that in higher education, incivility can be displayed by faculty or students and violates the norms of mutual respect in the teaching-learning environment. So, civility and incivility are sort of flip sides of the same coin, I think. But civility isn't only behavior, and I say this to you because of the example of the deans at Columbia. Outwardly, we can assume that their demeanor was civil. But one can be outwardly civil, but inwardly contemptuous or even clueless. And certainly the text messages that they exchanged, one of which was LMAO, which my students tell me stands for laughing my ass off. They're my major source of information about the acronyms that float around on social media. And then another one was a vomit emoji, right? So this is really pretty contemptuous. However, I'm also going to submit to you that, you know, you could be outwardly civil, but also quite clueless, or outwardly uncivil and also clueless. So before I get into this, let me give you a couple of examples. I mean, maybe I'm outwardly civil to somebody, but I really don't know the norms of civility that exist in that society, and it's just dumb luck that I'm happy to do the right thing. Or I could be uncivil in another society, and when I am told that, I correct myself, but I don't sincerely apologize. I just act civilly for the sake of getting, say, a lucrative business contract or something like that. So there's that inward-outward dichotomy that can happen with respect to civility. And of course, this is not the only virtue or trait for which that's true. But the habit of civility is something that I would call dispositional civility, right? And here I want to talk a little bit about states, traits, and virtues. Okay, before I get to this slide, let me just talk about states and traits. So a state, as you know, is a very temporally discrete occurrence, right? You can have a mental state that is happy, but it goes away right away. You can have a more extended disposition, which is a trait, right? And I would say that individuals who are dispositionally civil can have that trait of civility, but they need not be virtuous. And that's because, I'll admit it, I'm a neo-Aristotelian. Okay? So, well, people who know me are fully aware. Okay? But, right? Warren is giving me testimony here. Okay, so neo-Aristotelian virtues, and indeed Aristotelian virtues, are entrenched, right? So as the virtue ethicist Rosalind Hursthouse has said, those virtues go all the way down. Okay? They are cross-situationally consistent, and of course this is language from the situationism debate that popped up a few years ago, and that is, by that is meant, well, that if you are truly civil, you can expect it to be civil in any number of contexts, right? When interacting with your boss, when interacting with your students, you know, when interacting with people on the street, that kind of thing. Okay? I tend to go into teaching mode occasionally, but let me know. Y'all with me? Okay. So now, neo-Aristotelian virtues are all also appropriately motivated. So it's a really interesting question. What is the appropriate motivation for civility? And I tend to think respect is not a bad candidate. But I don't want to say it's the only motivation. There could be others, right? Now, appropriate affect. What is the appropriate affect of civility? Well, you know, I'm concerned about you. Maybe I want to make a good impression. That's not exactly a good motivation for civility, but I wouldn't say it's a horrible motivation for civility. However, common courtesy respect for people as human beings, those seem to me to be affectively loaded concepts. I'm sure I'll get pushed back on something somewhere or other. I see people scribbling in their notebooks already. And this is guided by practical wisdom, if it's a neo-Aristotelian virtue. And practical wisdom, as you all know, is in the Greek phronesis. I always have to sling a few Greek words. Okay? And that is, phronesis is a mystery, kind of. Right? There's this suite of virtues that Aristotle identifies in book 6 of the Nicomachean Ethics. And they come together to form phronesis. But you can't be virtuous without phronesis, and you can't have phronesis without virtue. Okay? We'll have a test later. So are we good so far?
Yeah.
Okay, now respect. I'm not a scholar of respect, so I went to that time-honored source, no, not Wikipedia, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and I accessed the work that has been done by a true scholar of respect, Robin Dillon. Okay? And so Dillon thinks that respect involves legitimate claims. What does that mean? I have a claim on your respect. You have a claim on my respect, right? Because we're human beings. But I'm going to put that a bit more precisely in a moment or two. Appropriate behavior, right? So we all have to behave appropriately toward each other. We're not going to have a food fight in here, folks. Later in the dining room, that'll be the place. But the behavior has to be appropriate, right? Attitudes of respect, and she says cognitive, she includes motivational under conative, and I separated those out, valuational and normative dimensions. I'm not going to go through all of those, but you get the picture. It's complicated. It's very complicated. But here's a point that I think is important. Respect and norms. So there are universal moral norms, valid for all moral agents, and we're still in the Dillon article now. And then there are social norms that are more fine-grained. Now with universal moral norms, as human beings, we all have rights to respectful treatment, right? We should all be treated with respect. Social norms are more fine-grained. And I have here the example of Amy. So Amy was a student at the same institution where I taught Warren. She was an undergraduate. At that institution, I had a colleague who was a senior colleague. He had been there for many years. He had committed sexual harassment for the entire time I was a faculty member there, and for the preceding time when I was a graduate student there. And he had a network of cronies in the department and in the dean's office and higher up, and they were committed to doing nothing about him. And this young woman, Amy, her dad worked in the admissions office. And so Amy filed a complaint, a sexual harassment complaint against this colleague, and it was mishandled by the philosophy department. But the moral of this story, the point of this story, is that he was so used to getting away with things that he would not call on her when she raised her hand a lot. And then when she would write it in her notebook to document it, he would say in a sarcastic tone of voice, "Oh, look, Amy is documenting again. She's writing something in her notebook." Now, this is not only a violation of a universal moral norm, but it is certainly a violation of a social norm regarding students and teachers, right? That, none of this should ever have happened. The sexual harassment should never have happened. The documentation should have been respected. He should have called on her in class, the sarcastic tone of voice, you name it, There were so many things wrong with that. We could go on and on. But clearly, Amy was not respected by the professor, nor was she respected by the philosophy department, nor was she or any of his other, I hesitate to use the word victims because they're all survivors, right? Nor were any of the other women respected by that institution, right? So we're talking about multiple levels of disrespect here. Now, this is a nice segue, I think, to a little bit of other work that I did in terms of the initial clarification of concepts. And this is about bullying. So at a certain point, I think, disrespect and incivility can bleed over into bullying. And this is an area where, as Tony will point out, I think, the value realm is sort of shapeless. It's amorphous, right? But according to the American Psychological Association, bullying is a form of aggressive behavior in which someone intentionally and repeatedly causes another person injury or discomfort. Bullying can take the form of physical contact, words, or more subtle actions. So it's really kind of interesting what might amount to bullying, right? And I'm not sure why bullying is defined as repeatedly. Okay, it seems to me that you can have a single instance of bullying and it still counts as bullying, right? But the bullied individual typically has trouble defending him or herself and does nothing to cause the bullying. Okay, and so that's a sort of paradigm case where you're talking about somebody who is possibly in a lower rung on the power scale and is getting bullied by somebody higher up and hasn't really done anything, but is just the sort of victim of this person's nastiness, you might say. Okay? Are we good on this?
Yep.
All right. Just when you think it couldn't get worse, we go to mobbing. How many of you have heard of mobbing? Have you heard of mobbing? Okay. So mobbing, and this is from Duffy and Sperry 2012. They have an entire book on this. Can you read that at all? Okay. Workplace mobbing is non-sexual harassment of a coworker by a group of members of an organization for the purpose of removing the targeted individual or individuals from the organization, or at least a particular unit of the organization. Mobbing involves individual, group, and organizational dynamics. It results in humiliation, devaluation, discrediting, and degradation, the loss of professional reputation, often removal of the victim from the organization through termination, extended medical leave, or quitting. The results of this typically protracted traumatizing experience are significant financial, career, health, and psychosocial losses or other negative consequences. Mobbing has different levels of severity. And the difference between bullying and mobbing, according to Duffy and Sperry, is that with bullying there's a single perpetrator, and with mobbing it's a collective. Okay, now this is, I think, what can happen when norms of civility are not taken seriously in a unit. I mean, I think if you have norms of civility being ignored, bullies can arise. Bullies can recruit others along with them. They can make life miserable for people who are in lower positions of power, that kind of thing. And we can talk about this, of course. But I do know that often staff people in various departments and universities are treated quite poorly. Not only by single faculty members, but by numbers of faculty members. Student workers are also treated the same way. They are treated with disrespect. So, all of this is to say, we've got some problems in academia. Okay, so now let's go to the conceptual and the practical. Here's a tragic case. So this, I think, was either in the Chronicle of Higher Education, or I think it might have been in Inside Education's that one, Inside Higher Education's that another one. I mean, I can't remember which one it was in. But it was an article by Hollis in 2024, and Hollis was a colleague of this woman, Dr. Antoinette Bonnie Candia-Bailey. She was formerly the Vice President of Student Affairs at Lincoln University in Missouri. And she committed suicide, I think she was 49, quite young. And in emails, she accused the president of bullying and harassing her. So this can happen at very high levels of the university. So here are some statistics from Hollis. Between 58 and 62% of higher education employees face workplace bullying. The percentages are higher for women, people of color, and members of the LGBTQ+ community. Now, I want to talk to you now about some more positive initiatives, and these are coming from my provost at the University of Kansas, right? And so, change is coming from the top, but it's also going to have to come from the bottom up in the middle ranks too, right? So this acronym, Jayhawk Hearts, is for KU administrators, and this is humility. Have self-awareness and be willing to acknowledge that I am not an expert at everything, and ever curious and appreciative, and I'll let you read those because those are the values that she set out specifically for administrators, right? And she's made some changes in administration at various levels. So, as she said to me, these Jayhawk Hearts, this acronym, is meant to find out who's on the bus and who isn't. So if you're on the bus, you can stay. If you're not on the bus, go. Out of the position or out of the university. And some people have gone out of their positions but stayed at the university, and some people have left. So she's serious. She's serious about this. Now, here's the iRise Culture Charter. This was formed in 2022, and it was formed by the provost, by senior administrators, and by people in faculty governance. And iRise refers to integrity, respect, innovation, stewardship, and excellence. And recently, Kopi and I, with the provost's support and with her contribution to the grant application, got a small grant, $46,000, a capacity building grant, from the Educating Character Initiative at Wake Forest University. And so what we're doing is trying to build some capacity among students, faculty, and staff, right? So there's funding for 12 iRise scholars, 6 staff, 6 faculty, and then students, we're going to hire 10 student scholars to work next semester to flesh this out and have a sustainability plan. And now I'm teaching a course entitled Character, Engagement, and Society, which integrates these values, integrates character, the 7 Habits for Forming Character that the Wake Forest Program for Leadership came up with, and also studies exemplar theory, exemplarism in philosophy, and to a certain extent in psychology. So we're working on this, and we know it's not going to be easy, but I'm committed to doing this, and I think it's a really interesting project, and we're going to go after a larger grant after this one is over. Okay. So the provost is Barb Bickelmeyer. I love her, by the way. I mean, she is an administrator. I mean, I have, in my 38 years of teaching, I've come across a lot of administrators. She's the best. She gets it. Okay? And she's trying to reconceive of higher education as a talent development enterprise. So, she says here, and this was in a 5 Values for a Better KU, this is when she rolled out iRise in the spring. What happens here at KU is more than a paycheck and more than a degree. We are each invested in relationships, in improving ourselves and improving the world around us. Our iRise Culture Charter validates what it looks like to be a diverse community, what it means to support learning and advancement, and how we grow through always seeking ways to improve. Please take some time to review the Culture Charter and contemplate how you express and experience these values and agreements. Do you see yourself and your colleagues reflected in them? Do they motivate you? Do they empower you? Now, she put this email out with a call for nominations for people who exemplify the iRise values. And so that's how we selected the IRIS faculty and staff fellows. They were nominated by their peers. And it's been very interesting to work with them. But I wanted to give you a sense of what we're trying to do at KU to implement change. And so in this last section of the paper, how am I doing on time?
You got about 8 minutes.
Ooh, okay, we're good. Alrighty then. Okay, so here's some lessons from social science. And these are interesting, right? So the hybrid corn seed study. You're like, gosh, you've really lost it. What can we learn from hybrid corn seed? Well, in 1950, Ryan and Gross studied the acceptance and diffusion in two Iowa communities of a major agricultural innovation. And it was hybrid corn seed, right? And at first, these farmers in Iowa, they weren't buying it, right? They weren't buying it. But, in a matter of 10 or 12 years, maybe a little longer, that everybody was using it. And the 3 lessons here, number 1, messaging and modeling from different groups, right? So let me just explain this. Salesmen, nobody believes salesmen, right? Salesmen went out to these Iowa farms, and guess what? Farmers weren't buying it. When some of their neighbors started to use it, they started to listen, right? And then when administrators talk to faculty, do faculty listen? Sorry, Warren, but I think we all know what the answer is, okay? But faculty listen to other faculty, right? I hope. I mean, they might listen a little better, I don't know. But that's number 1. And then the second lesson is the uneven pace of change. So the uptake of changes could be slow at first. But, I'm talking about, changing a culture of an institution where there's a damaged culture, right? As the quality of academic life improves, the pace of uptake should increase. So after the majority of faculty and staff have come on board, the pace should slow down as positive changes, we hope, become settled norms regulating interpersonal interactions. And that's what was evident in that hybrid corn seed study, right? That, slow uptake at first, then sped up, then slowed down. So, number 3 is age. Age differences between earlier and later adopters. So younger farmers were more willing to try that corn seed than the older ones were later. So we had a panel discussion yesterday. Where's Darby? Is Darby here? Oh, there you are. You said crotchety old people, right? And crotchety older colleagues. And I pointed out, well, I have some crotchety younger colleagues, right? And so there's some people who are just kind of enmeshed in what they're already doing. They don't want to change. Change is hard, right? But if you can get people to change, it could be a very good thing. Did you just wait 5 minutes?
I did.
Okay then. And then there's the famous towel reuse study. I'm sure you're all familiar with this one. Goldstein and Cialdini in 2007 put together the focus theory of normative conduct. So they distinguish between descriptive and injunctive social norms. So descriptive norms are saying, this is what we do. Injunctive norms saying this is what we should do. So the trick here is to try to replace these norms of incivility, norms of disrespect, with norms of civility, respect, IRIS values, that sort of thing. And so there's a challenge of keeping effective messaging salient. And the study found that the most effective messaging that fostered behavioral change encouraged identification with a group. So higher education, institutions of higher education have a leg up here because you're talking about Jayhawk values. We are the Jayhawks at KU. We're talking about values with which we can identify. Right? Finally, let me talk about the famous Composting in Canada study. Canadians, stand up and be proud. Okay? Because this study showed that, I'm sorry, wait a second. What did this study show, you may ask? Okay, what this study showed was diners and in mall food courts composted more when they saw somebody else do it, and that the presence of signs didn't make a difference, either alone or with the composting behavior. So there, the lesson was modeling matters, okay? But the bigger lesson here is that culture matters, and social pressure to conform to desired behavior matters. So I have a few comments here about how administrators at all levels in HR departments have the authority and the resources to stop bullying and mobbing, right? And the conclusion is that institutional cultures that have permitted incivility are entrenched. So change should be data-driven and is sorely needed in this day and age. And I think that's all I have for you. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Nancy, for those remarks. Now I'll introduce our respondent. Professor Tony Layden is a distinguished professor of philosophy known for his work in political philosophy, ethics, and theories of reasoning, and is a good friend of Nate. He is particularly recognized for contributions to deliberative democracy and the role of reason in social cooperation. Tony's research often explores how individuals can engage in productive and respectful dialogue, even amidst deep moral and political disagreements. As a professor of philosophy at the University of Illinois at Chicago, he is also associate director of the Center for Ethics and Education, which is, as you all know, a collaboration with the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He's published extensively on topics such as public reasoning, identity, and social practices, influencing both academic and public discourse. Please join me in welcoming Professor Tony.